I think my favorite part of the LEGO games might have been starting shit in the hub locations of the cantina. I would just be playing as old Ben Kenobi and just go up to Luke and just slice him with my lightsaber. And then everybody would just lose their minds. It didn't matter if you were on the same side. It was amazing. There were no real moral consequences in a LEGO Star Wars game. Maybe I'm a bad person. Everybody with a pulse has enjoyed Legos at some point in their lives. They've been around since the 1940s, and they have revolutionized so much so that products stemming from clothes to snacks to movies, as we see, of course, in the most recent media, and of course, these fashionable bad boys. You didn't get a date unless you wore those. They even have their own theme park, and it only got bigger when they started marketing towards the most intense type of buyer, the collector. You have your options with Legos. You have Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, DC, Indiana Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean, and guess what else? Star Wars Legos actually didn't hit the market until 1999 with the release of The Phantom Menace. Before that, there were no LEGO Star Wars on the scene. There was no loss or shortage of toys, of course, but people could not build the Millennium Falcon or the Death Star, or in my case, Jabba the Hutt's barge. It's still the best LEGO set, don't at me. And they couldn't do any of that until 1999 with the release of an X-Wing fighter, and then followed by that a ton of other LEGO sets. And from there, unsurprisingly, they ran with it because Star Wars was just so big, and they started collecting other franchises as well, like the aforementioned ones that I just listed. You could say in a way that Star Wars revolutionized Legos. I mean, there are just countless ships and minifigures and different settings, and it's an ever-expanding universe. It was perfect for it. However, despite Star Wars being the first intellectual property that they acquired, Harry Potter was technically the first to get the video game treatment with the creator games of the first movie and then the second movie. And this makes sense, because Harry Potter was blowing up on a critical level in 2001. You gotta remember, like, the first movie came out, it was just, whew, especially from the uptake of the books in the 90s. And Star Wars, as much as we love it, was not getting the same kind of representation. I mean, yes, they were in full-fledged in their prequel trilogy, but that wasn't exactly getting the love that they thought it was going to. But when it did arrive in 2005, after the prequel trilogy had concluded, it comprised of the technical first three movies. And this was smart because the prequel trilogy definitely didn't get the same amount of love that they were hoping for. However, it did give people the chance to poke fun at it and to actually make use of some things that were not properly utilized, like Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar is useless in the movies, but he's actually really useful in the games. No one can jump higher than him in the LEGO Star Wars games, and he even has things that only he can do. And exploring things like the Gungan world on Naboo is just super, super cool, and pod racing, and the lightsaber battles, the ones that there are probably too many of in the prequel series, and all the other cool stuff was made it perfect for a video game. And from there, they just took it and ran, as they should, because it's pretty awesome.
In all fairness, I love every single LEGO Star Wars game to some degree. Well, most of them anyway. But I do have a particular soft spot for the original prequel.
That's an oxymoron, right?
It was the first, after all, and the same way the original trilogy hits a certain sweet spot feeling that truly cannot be replicated on an emotional level, this game has that too.
I don't want to compare it to drugs, because pug's not drugs, my guys. But you know how, like, with ecstasy, they say that the first hit is, like, the best high that you'll ever have in your entire life, and you'll spend the rest of your drug-doing life chasing that first high. Again, don't do drugs. I don't do drugs. But it's like that, because the first Star Wars game, it just ignited everything else in LEGO history as far as video games go. And in my opinion, they haven't been able to capture that same level of magic. Not even in the Harry Potter games, which kind of suck.
A LEGO game of this caliber had virtually never been crafted before. Whether you were a fan of Star Wars or not, I feel like everyone owned this game. I owned it for the GameCube because I'd always been a Nintendo fan as well as a Star Wars fan, of course. But I had cousins that had this on the PS2 and even knew people that had it on the PC or the Game Boy. But RIP to those Game Boy players, because with only 15 playable characters and no co-op, that version sucked. The console versions, though, absolute fire. It wasn't even about capturing nostalgia with the first game, but just giving people the perfect combination of structured storyline, customization, free play, and achievement rewarding. On top of all that, you get to wreck absolutely everything. And you cannot convince me that this isn't the most satisfying part of these games. And there was just so much to explore. You get to play your way through the first 3 movies, but with additional rooms and features that you never saw before, with a level of humor that was silly, but relevant somehow. The cutscenes were 10,000 out of 10. And while they gave you the general gist of what was going on, they never got to be taken all that seriously. The one that comes to mind for me is when Qui-Gon dies after Obi-Wan slices Maul in half, and you can still see Maul's legs dancing around in the background. Did I mention that the secret level you can unlock basically predicted Rogue One's infamous Vader scene, except you get to go all Vader on that rebel scum? Plus, hanging out in Dex's Diner is interesting because we spend very minimal time there in the actual movies. The same could be said about the Cantina in a way, but there's definitely enough cultural following, as well as numerous copycat cantinas to make that relevant. But Dex's Diner is virtually unexplored and somehow makes it a great fit for the hub. After the success of its predecessor, it was only a matter of time before they popped out the more popular of the 2 trilogies. There was a lot of high stakes for this one, too. I mean, it would have been very hard to mess up the prequels even further, sans for maybe terrible game mechanics.
But the Force color, the same color as their lightsaber, targets are shown, you just put a stupid helmet on yourself and you blend in. Droid to control panel with a little picture over it. This is not meant to be overcomplicated. It's meant to be fun. And it is fun. It's so fun.
But the beauty of how they handled the revered OG trilogy goes as such. They honored it and they still poked fun at it, but never took away from the humor or the integrity of the source material. There was a lot of improvements from the first game in just the span of a year, because the camera movements as well as graphics definitely take a bigger leap here. Okay, they're not Fallen Order good, but we're not here for that. You don't get to play as quite as many characters in this one, or at least it feels that way, being that there are a lot of variants of the same character. Even if there are roughly technically 70 of them and there were only 59 in the original game. But I sure know I wasn't complaining, because for only roughly 1 million studs, you could get one of the ghost characters that can't be detected or hurt by enemies, because Legos can die too.
I mean, we've learned from The Last Jedi that, Yoda is corporal enough to light fires onto trees, apparently. I mean, I know he's a ghost, but he can do that. So let me ask you this. Why? And then the Lego games foreshadowed this beforehand. So let me ask you this. Why are the Skywalkers and company fighting all these battles when the ghosts can do it without being seen, being hurt? What do they have to lose? They're already dead.
But wait, there's more. Just because there's a lot of the same variation does not mean the prequel characters need to be left out. If you had your LEGO Star Wars data saved on the same memory card as your LEGO Star Wars 2 game, the system could recognize that and import those characters over to LEGO Star Wars 2. Like its predecessor, there are a lot of fun gags here. If you go the right way on the Death Star, you'll stumble across a Stormtrooper spa where all of them are kicking it back in bathing suits in a hot tub like bros. Still wearing their helmets, though. They're called Beach Troopers. Chewbacca somehow blends in as a stormtrooper when the helmet doesn't even fit on his head, and the fact that you can just put a helmet on to blend in is a humorous gag in and of itself, since that's all anyone ever seems to do in Star Wars, to sneak by the baddies. One of the cutest additions to LEGO Star Wars 2 was the increase in reward value. I mentioned that one of the best parts of these games is the achievement and how it's strangely worth it to complete 100%. And after you obtain 60 gold bricks and beat story mode, you get access to Lego City, which is essentially a true amalgamation of Star Wars and classic Lego. You can complete challenges here or do essentially whatever you want in this sandbox-like bonus level. But do you know what's better than Lego Star Wars and Lego Star Wars 2? I'll tell you. The complete saga. Yeah, at the time, little me didn't consider the fact that I basically paid for these games twice, but I justified it because I bought this one for the Nintendo Wii, which at least meant it was for a different system, technically. Since these are basically the same, I'll just list some tweaks. The prequel characters were updated and given their own melee attacks, as well as being able to dodge blaster fire like the original trilogy counterparts. There was an addition of a 2-player battle arena mode called Arcade Mode, some redesign of some levels like pod racing and the gunship cavalry levels from the first game, 2 originally cut levels from the first game called Anakin's Flight and Bounty Hunter Pursuit were later added in. New characters were added since there were only 59 in the first game and about 70 in the second, but this game has a total of 160 unlockable characters. Funnily enough, including Indiana Jones. Foreshadowing much? One of the elephants in the room with LEGO Star Wars is the fact that it existed during a magical time in a video game history, known as cheat codes. The thing was, this wasn't hacking by any measure. These codes were built into the game, and back in the day, if you didn't go online and look them up, you'd buy a video game cheat book, which would have a plethora of various cheat codes to add fun stuff to the game of your choice. Most games in the early to mid 2000s contained these, and it was always fun to see the developers incorporate it for fun. Both 1 and 2, and the complete saga by default, thrived off of those. They'd help you unlock characters and even weird extras like a Santa Claus beard for your customizable character. The characters didn't necessarily mean you owned them. The aforementioned ghost characters still needed to be purchased, but they couldn't be purchased unless you unlocked them. I don't know why I felt like a supercomputer hacker when I did this, but it was satisfying. Speaking of customizable characters, did you ever want Darth Vader to wear Leia's slave bikini, have a Wookiee head on a Yoda body, make your own stormtrooper or droid? It's all right here, and this kind of feature really made you feel immersed into the game and universe in ways that other franchises couldn't compete. And then we have the black sheep of the first 3 Star Wars games. That's right, there are 3. Everybody kind of forgets about the Clone Wars Star Wars LEGO game, and it's kind of a shame because it does offer some seriously fun gameplay and a new array of characters, including fan favorite Ahsoka Tano. But the hub being on a ship kind of makes it a bit boring, and there isn't enough diversity at which the game kind of traverses through in and of itself, which is disappointing since the Clone Wars TV show, which I absolutely love, has so much exposure to different planets and different forms of life that I don't think were properly utilized in this game. That being said, I really enjoyed playing through the episodes and reliving experiences from the show on a more personal level. It does feel like there is less room to play around here and that the overwhelming amount of content they cover can be confusing to someone who never saw the show before. But in truth, the reason this version isn't nearly as heralded as its predecessors is the same reason the show doesn't get that much credit as the movies. The general audience only really pays attention to the main saga, and LEGO Star Wars, both 1, 2, and the complete saga, touched a certain special spot in a casual fan's heart. It let them enjoy both LEGOs and Star Wars, and kind of get the baseline of what was going on. The Clone Wars had a bunch of faces they didn't recognize and by default didn't care about. Sadly, even though I did own this game upon release, I was kind of sliding it out of my LEGO phase, and most of my playtime with this game was in later years. I really love The Force Awakens as a movie. I feel like that should just be said before I talk about why I'm annoyed this game was made. It's not inherently a bad title either. I own this game. It's well made and even offers a lot to do even if it's only centered around one movie. Then, of course, lays the problem. It's only based on one movie. LEGO. I get it. It's been a while, and you're chomping at the bits to throw another LEGO Star Wars game on the shelves. It's one of, if not your most successful property, and you saw how ridiculously well The Force Awakens did on a monetary and hype basis. You were ready for some mad, serious studs.
Like buy all the ghost characters in the Cantina studs.
But the beauty of what made the first 3, and yeah, I'll say 3 since LEGO Star Wars 3 gets no love, games amazing, was the ability to play an entire stream of movies, to play an entire narrative. Star Wars is about the saga, and it's hard to push through what is basically a shot-for-shot remake of The Force Awakens when I don't have the choice of being anything beyond that. Also, how are you going to go sell this for $60 when it's just a single movie adaptation? Will I still buy the inevitable LEGO sequel trilogy game? Absolutely. If you'll notice, though, they haven't done the single movie LEGO game since then. I guess I'm not the only one who was annoyed. When it comes to the other franchises with LEGO, in spite of some missteps, you don't really see the same hype surrounding it. As I mentioned earlier, LEGO Star Wars really started it all and began what LEGO video games are. Some take it their own way, like Lord of the Rings, which adds a more open concept, and some go more linear, like the Harry Potter games. I don't think it's necessarily that these were crafted overall better, since the mechanics are essentially the same across the board, with improvements over time, of course. But just that Star Wars is perfect for LEGO. There's a billion moving pieces, characters, and lore to poke fun at and work with. The planets and settings all look different and provide constant change of pace, but it all still feels unified and never feels too big for its britches. One level you're on a swamp in Dagobah with Yoda, and the next you're in the beautiful Cloud City. Each level is so diversified in ways the other games really can't be. The piloting levels all feel different because it isn't as simple as driving a vehicle in a chase sequence as it would be in Indiana Jones or the Marvel games. There's speeders and X-Wings and pod racers and more, not to mention the amount of animals like banthas you can hijack. There's constant action in Star Wars, as well as a heavy reliance on visual storytelling that keeps these non-audio games constantly moving without any dull points to make you yawn. Sorry, Harry Potter. It's different and it's fresh, sorry Pirates of the Caribbean, and delivers something new every time.
Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. May the Force be with you.